Greetings to everyone watching across Africa, and to everyone who still believes this continent deserves the right to shape its own future. There are moments when a nation does not simply lose a man. It is forced to confront the reality of its own survival. That is exactly what Mali is facing today. The death of General Sadio Camara was not just another battlefield loss. It was a shock that struck at the very heart of Mali's military leadership. And within days, the country entered a new phase. President Assimi Goïta moved quickly, taking direct control of the Ministry of Defense while the Malian Armed Forces launched a series of aggressive airstrikes across multiple regions of the country. Dozens of armed fighters were reportedly eliminated, military vehicles were destroyed, fuel depots and logistics bases were reduced to ashes. From Diura to Sévaré and Menaka, Mali was sending a message that the era of passive defense may be ending. But the deeper question is far bigger than one military operation. Is Mali transforming itself into a wartime state designed for permanent counterterrorism operations across the Sahel? Because what we are witnessing today is not only about Mali, it is about the future of security in West Africa, the balance of power in the Sahel, and the growing belief among many Africans that foreign powers will never protect this continent better than Africans themselves. And in geopolitics, no crisis appears by accident. What happened after the death of Sadio Camara may reveal something much larger now unfolding across the region. In this video, we will go beyond the headlines to understand how Mali is rebuilding its military strategy, why Assimi Goïta is concentrating power, and whether the Sahel is entering a new era of organized regional warfare against terrorism. Follow this channel if you want to understand Africa through the perspective of Africa itself. The death of Sadio Camara changed the political atmosphere inside Mali almost immediately. For years, Camara had been one of the most influential figures inside the country's military establishment. He was not simply a defense minister. He represented the hardline security doctrine that shaped Mali after the political upheavals of 2020 and 2021. He supported the modernization of the armed forces, stronger military sovereignty, and closer strategic cooperation with Russia at a time when relations with France were rapidly collapsing. That is why his death during the wave of coordinated terrorist attacks in late April sent shockwaves through Bamako. The attacks were not limited to remote desert outposts. Armed groups struck multiple strategic areas across the country, exposing how deeply insecurity still threatens the Malian state. For many inside the government, this was no longer viewed as isolated terrorism. It was treated as a direct challenge to the survival of national authority itself. And Assimi Goïta responded immediately. By taking direct control of the Ministry of Defense, Goïta concentrated military and political authority around a single command structure. In wartime, that type of decision usually signals one thing. The leadership believes the country is entering a more dangerous and decisive phase. At the same time, the Malian Armed Forces intensified offensive operations across the country. Airstrikes targeted armed positions west of Diora, north of Sévaré, and southeast of Menaka. According to military statements, dozens of fighters were neutralized while pickup trucks, motorcycles, ammunition depots, and fuel storage sites were destroyed. But these strikes reveal something even more important. Mali is no longer focusing only on defending territory after attacks occur. The strategy is shifting toward destroying logistics, mobility, and supply systems before armed groups can organize future offensives. In modern asymmetric warfare, fuel depots can be as valuable as weapons. Destroying transportation routes can weaken entire insurgent networks spread across the vast Sahel region. And increasingly, Mali is using drones and air power to fight that war at speed. What is happening in Mali today cannot be separated from the larger transformation taking place across the Sahel. Mali is no longer fighting alone. Together with Burkina Faso and Niger, it now forms the Alliance of Sahel States, widely known as AES. What began as a political alliance is rapidly evolving into a regional security structure designed for coordinated military action against extremist groups operating across borders. And that changes everything. For years, terrorist networks in the Sahel survived by exploiting weak borders, poor coordination, and divided governments. Fighters could move from Mali into Niger, from Burkina Faso into remote desert corridors, then regroup before launching another attack. AES is trying to break that cycle. Under Assimi Goïta in Mali, Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, and Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger, the alliance is promoting a new idea. African states should define African security on their own terms. That message has gained enormous support among many citizens across the region. To supporters, these leaders represent sovereignty, resistance, and the refusal to remain dependent on foreign military powers that spent years in the Sahel without eliminating terrorism. And this is where Russia enters the picture. Moscow has become a strategic partner for Mali by providing military equipment, training, and political backing at a time when relations with France and several Western governments sharply deteriorated. For Bamako, the logic is simple. If previous Western-led security models failed to stabilize the region, then Mali believes it has the right to pursue another path. But the situation is more complex than a simple victory for Russia or a total defeat for the West. Russia also has geopolitical interests in Africa, influence, resources, military positioning, and strategic alliances all matter in the larger global competition now unfolding across the continent. And in geopolitics, no crisis appears by accident. The debate surrounding Mali has now expanded far beyond terrorism itself. Western governments and international organizations increasingly warn that Mali and its allies are concentrating too much power inside military-led governments. Critics argue that democratic institutions are weakening while the region becomes more militarized with every new security crisis. There are also growing accusations regarding Russia's role in the Sahel. Some Western analysts claim that Russian military influence and private security structures have intensified violence while failing to fully stabilize the region. But many people across Mali and the wider Sahel respond with a different question. If years of foreign military missions could not stop the expansion of extremist violence, then why should African nations continue following the same strategy forever? That question explains why leaders like Assimi Goïta and Ibrahim Traoré continue receiving support from many citizens despite international criticism. To many Africans, this is no longer only about military operations. It is about dignity, sovereignty, and the belief that Africa must eventually control its own security systems instead of depending entirely on outside powers. Still, Mali faces enormous challenges ahead. The Sahel has become the global center of terrorism, with extremist networks adapting quickly across massive desert territories and fragile borders. Groups linked to JNM and the Islamic State continue using mobility, smuggling routes, and local instability to survive. This means military victories alone will never be enough. A drone can destroy a convoy. An airstrike can eliminate a base. But long-term stability requires something harder to build: public trust, functioning institutions, economic opportunity, and regional cooperation strong enough to prevent extremist groups from constantly regenerating. In the coming months, 3 possible scenarios may emerge. First, AES could intensify joint military operations across the region. Second, extremist groups may launch even larger retaliatory attacks in response to growing pressure. And third, the Sahel could enter a prolonged era of permanent, low-intensity warfare that reshapes politics, economics, and security across West Africa for an entire generation. The real question is no longer whether Mali will continue fighting. The real question is what this new model of power will ultimately become. What we are witnessing in Mali today is not simply another chapter in the long war against terrorism. It may be the beginning of a completely different political and military era for the Sahel. A region that once depended heavily on foreign military intervention is now attempting to build its own security structure, its own alliances, and its own strategic doctrine under African leadership. Whether that effort succeeds or fails could shape the future of West Africa for decades, because the stakes are now far bigger than battlefield victories. This is about sovereignty. It is about who controls security, resources, borders, and ultimately the political destiny of the region itself. But history also offers a warning. Military power can slow chaos. It can destroy armed networks. It can protect a state from collapse. But without economic stability, functioning institutions, and public trust, even the strongest security strategy can become trapped inside an endless cycle of war. That is the challenge Mali now faces. Not only defeating extremist groups, but proving that a wartime state can eventually produce long-term stability instead of permanent conflict. In the coming months, all eyes will remain focused on Bamako, on AES, and on the broader Sahel region. Not simply to see what happened, but to see what happens next. Will this become the foundation of a stronger African-led security order? Or the beginning of a much longer confrontation that reshapes the continent for an entire generation? Follow this channel if you want to understand Africa through the perspective of Africa itself, because in the next video, we will go deeper into the hidden geopolitical battle behind the Sahel crisis, where resources, foreign influence, and military strategy intersect in ways most headlines never fully explain. History does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who understand the rules of the game.